All right, reporting live from janeequipment.com. Today we're going to be doing an overview of an 8-gallon a minute hot water skid unit. This is a Stealth 8115 Pro-30HG. Pretty much identical to the Pressure Pro models. So if you have a Pressure Pro model, this video will definitely work for you to help you identify everything on your unit, any maintenance you need to be doing, or maybe help answer some questions that you're not sure about. So first we're just going to go over all the components. Here across the front side, we'll start at the bottom. We got two 12-gallon tanks, one for diesel fuel, which is going to power the burner. One is for gasoline, which is for a Honda engine. Moving right up the way, we have our pressure washer pump. On this one, we have a General Pump TSF 2021. That's an 8-gallon pump. We have our Honda GX690 engine, widely considered a 24 horsepower engine. On this unit, this one is coming with a 115 volt generator. Some units come with the generator, some units don't have the generator. It depends on which one you picked up, and I'll go over the differences real quick. So if you have a generator on your unit, what this is doing for you is while your unit is running, it's making sure that your battery is at optimum charge at all times. If you picked up your unit with a generator, then chances are you're never charging your battery because the generator is doing that job for you, which is a big plus. The only slight drawback, which I don't even really consider it a drawback, is that because the generator is driven off of a belt drive on the engine, it actually brings the PSI of this unit to 3,000. Let's say you have a unit that doesn't have the generator, you would actually have 3,500 PSI. So that's the difference between the generator and non-generated unit. Also, if you don't have a generator, sometimes you could run into a situation where your battery has enough power to turn your unit on, but it won't actually have enough power to run the generator. So let's say you do have what's considered a 12 volt unit, which doesn't have the generator. If you ever run into a situation where your unit's running, but your burner doesn't seem to be firing up, it could be your battery's just not charged enough, something to look out for. I think we got everything across the front. Let's make our way to the back of the unit over here. And obviously we have our big clamshell hot water heater powered by our Beckett burner. And here you can see our diesel lines here running up into the unit with our diesel fuel filter here. And a lot of people ask me why there's two lines. The reason is this burner actually is going to draw more diesel than is required because it uses some of the diesel as a lubricant. And then once it gets lubed up and ready to roll, it actually pushes some of the diesel back down to your tank. So that's why the diesel has a return line. Moving right this way, we actually see our battery here. And we're going to go over all of these different plumbings, which are a lot of different safety components on this unit. All of these safety components are extremely important, and we're going to go over them right now. So what I'm going to do is we're just actually going to follow the plumbing as it goes. So let's come over to the pump, and we're just going to follow this plumbing. So as the plumbing here is coming out of our pump, it's connecting here to this block mounted unloader. And what we're seeing here is we have one small bypass here, which is bypassing the water, just in a recirculation mode here. But most of your water is going to bypass out of this larger hose. So there are two kind of different ways the water is bypassing on this unit. The majority of the water will bypass out of this long hose. And this hose is designed to be put back into your water supply tank. Whether you have a 200 or 500 gallon tank, this line would essentially be dropped back in there so that when you release the trigger on your gun, the water is dumping back into your tank. So moving along, obviously we have our unloader here, and then we have our water traveling over here, and right around here, we're gonna come into our first safety feature. Right here we have a burst disc. What this burst disc is designed to do is, this is pretty similar to a pressure relief valve, except for it reacts to both pressure and temperature. So if your pressure is too high, this burst disc will release the pressure. If your temperature is too high, this burst disc will also release and get all the water out of the system. So like I said, it's pretty similar to a pressure relief valve, except for it's both pressure and temperature sensitive. So then we got the water coming back up into the burner here where it enters a coil. It's going to kind of circle around the coil a whole bunch of times, getting hotter and hotter. And then over here, the water's coming back out of our water heater. Once again, it's actually running into another burst disc here. This is a secondary safety feature. As the water's coming out, it should be reaching temperature. We want to make sure the water is not too hot or not too overpressurized. If that were the case, the burst disc would release all of this pretty instantly. Like I said, it's a secondary safety feature. I always want to mention these burst discs are extremely important. You never want to override these safety features. You never want to try and plumb things around them. You want to make sure they're fully functional. It's for your safety, it's for your employee safety, and the safety for the rest of the equipment on your rig. You would never want this burner to be running uninhibited or without any kind of pressure or temperature safety features in place. Extremely important that these rupture discs are always functional. If you have one that ruptures, I suggest you just replace it immediately. Continuing along this line, before the water exits the system here, there's actually one more thing it's coming into here. And what we have here is this is actually a part of your thermostat. As you can see, this what appears to be a wire is running back into your thermostat box. The reason I say it appears to be a wire is because this is actually a tube filled with oil. It's not just a wire. So this tube is actually fairly sensitive and fragile. You don't want to kink it up. You don't want to jam stuff in here or else it'll stop working. And like I mentioned before, this is actually our thermostat. This is where the temperature is being read of the water exiting the system. This lets the burner know if it's hot enough already to turn off or if it's not hot enough yet to continue to run. But it's important for the burner to know when it needs to turn off. You never want this thing just running, you know, like I said, uninhibited and without any limit. It needs to understand its current temperature and needs to be able to turn off when it reaches the temperature that you've set on the thermostat. So let's actually come across the front here, and we're going to talk about our thermostat and one more thing, which is another safety feature here, which is the flow switch. So first we're going to talk about the flow switch. This is the flow switch. Once again, this is a safety feature for your burner. What this is designed to do is it just detects water flow. So as long as it detects water flow, it will allow the burner to run. If for any reason this switch stops detecting water flow, it will not allow the burner to turn on. So there's really only two situations where you're not going to have water flow, and this flow switch should, react to that. The first situation is the engine's not running, the pressure washer pump is not on, or the pressure washer pump is not getting any water. The flow switch wouldn't detect any water flow. It wouldn't let the burner to run because it's not going to believe that the pump is on, so the burner's not going to run in that case. The other more normal situation, which you're not going to have flow in, is when you're in bypass mode. So on these systems, when you release the trigger on your gun and you go into bypass, the flow switch should actually realize you're in bypass and turn the burner off. So if you have one of these systems and your burner is not turning off when you release the trigger, you probably want to switch out your flow switch here and replace it, because it is an important safety feature. You don't want the burner running without water running through it. Extremely dangerous situation, and it's just a situation you never want to be in, to be honest. Up here we have the thermostat. It's pretty straightforward. Here we're going to set our temperature, and this is the on-off switch for the burner. One thing I always like to mention to people is you do not have to run the burner all the time. If you just want to run cold water, you leave the burner off. Whenever you do want your burner, you flip it on, but it doesn't have to be used at all times. You could definitely run this as just a cold water unit if you don't need hot water, based on the job you're doing. Here we have our thermostat. It ranges anywhere from 70 to 250 degrees. So just because it says 250 degrees doesn't guarantee that the water is going to get to 150 degrees. Essentially, a good way to look at how this thermostat's going to work for you is that This thermostat is gonna raise your temperature about 100 degrees from the ambient temperature of the water entering your system. So let's say you're in Alaska and the water entering our system is 0 degrees Fahrenheit. This burner at most will get it to about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's say you're in South Florida with me, where it's blazing hot every day. Our water entering the system is probably around 75 degrees on average. So this burner will actually be able to get up to about 170 degrees in that situation. So something to keep in mind, the burner can really only raise the ambient temperature of your water about 100 degrees. Moving on to that, we're gonna get into some maintenance of these things. So I feel like I've touched on every part of the unit, so now let's talk about maintenance. One of the first things I'll touch on is, let's say you have a brand new unit. We just picked up our unit. I just got it installed on my trailer, and I want to make sure I'm keeping everything on the up and up. It is recommended by the manufacturer on a brand new unit that after 20 hours of use, which I'd like to mention, this motor does have an hour counter, so you'll be able to know how many hours you've been running it. After about 20 hours of use, you want to go ahead and dump out your pump oil and your engine oil. You'll be able to do that right here from these two tubes sticking out of here. This is actually really convenient because it lets us drain our oil out without getting our hands all under here. So this one on the right side is going to be for the pump oil. This one on the left is going to be for the engine oil. We would just remove these brass caps, let the oil drain out. During your first 20 hours, if you're doing your first oil change, you're probably going to see a little bit of metal shavings in both the pump and engine oil. That's fairly normal. That's why we're breaking it in. It's why we're changing the oil so quickly. And essentially, we want to get that out, put fresh oil in. At the same time, you'll want to change your Honda engine oil filter, which is over here. You'll definitely also want to change that after the first 20 hours because we don't want any shavings being left behind in here, us putting our fresh oil in, and then just running those shavings back through our system. After your break-in period of 20 hours, you only have to change your oil on your pump and engine every 100 hours or every season, whatever comes first. Moving along here, before we make it to the back, I'm actually going to touch on some belt stuff. A lot of people really don't mention the belts. They don't bring up the belts. Swing around the back here. I want to show you guys how we're going to take this cover off, how we're going to expose the belts, and honestly how simple it is. There's 10 screws holding this belt cover on. There's 3 here, 1 on the top, a few across, and a few on the other side. I've already removed all my screws for this video, but it's just 10 screws. You remove them with a Phillips head screwdriver, nothing out of the ordinary. And once I get the screws out, I'm actually just going to shimmy this out. And this is going to slide right out toward me. And now we can get a real good look here at our belt setup. Let me move the battery. Let's get a good look at it. So getting in here, we get a really good look at our belt setup. And one thing I'll say about these units, whether it's a Stealth or a Pressure Pro unit, I've never seen a manufacturer have straighter belts. And for all you guys who've worked with belt drive machines, you know how important it is for these pulleys to be lined up perfectly. The pump side is driven by 3 belts on this side. The generator is only driven by 1 belt. The reason the generator only has 1 belt is because it doesn't have a lot of resistance or torque to it, so it spins very easily. 1 belt is more than enough. The pump is really where all the work is happening. That's why it has 3 belts on it. Out of the factory, they come with 3 individual belts. If you ever get a chance, I always recommend to upgrade to a single 3-wide belt. As far as belt maintenance goes, I like to tell people, honestly, you want to take this cover off and take a look at your belts about once every 3 months. It's much easier to replace your belts when you're not under the pressure of a job. The worst thing that can happen is you're halfway through someone's job and your belts blow, and now you have to leave the job undone. No one likes that. So I always tell people, look at your belts every 3 months and get in front of changing them. Don't wait for them to break before you change your belts, because 9 times out of 10 it's going to break at the absolute worst time possible. So moving on from that, we're going to talk about a little bit of the burner maintenance. Burner maintenance is something that a lot of people are really lacking on, but I have noticed A lot of the companies, a lot of my bigger guys, they're really getting on top of this because they're noticing how important it is to keep their burner maintained well. A good thing to do on your burner with every oil change, every season, every 100 hours, you want to do your diesel fuel filter here. There's going to be a fuel nozzle inside here, a diesel nozzle, and there's also going to be some electrodes. Those three parts really need to be maintained every season. You should change your fuel nozzle, you should readjust your electrodes or even replace them, and you should definitely be replacing your diesel fuel filter. And at this point, I'm actually going to talk about the diesel fuel filter. This one comes with a pretty basic paper filter, which does the job fairly well, and honestly, you know, it does do the job. I always recommend people, when it's time to change out this filter, you want to change it out for what I call a Raycor diesel fuel filter, because it's going to have water and fuel separator. Diesel fuel attracts a lot of moisture from the air, so it naturally, diesel fuel wants to get water into it, and by upgrading to that filter, which is really not very expensive and very easy to change, you're going to make sure that your diesel fuel is always, you know, pure, essentially. Bad diesel fuel will leave debris behind in your burner. You might see, you know, smoke coming out of your stack, which on a burner like this, you should never see any smoke. All you should ever see is the heat wave, no white smoke, no black smoke. If you're seeing that, you're having a problem with air-fuel mixture 9 times out of 10, or it could be debris in your coil, and we'll get to how you're going to deal with that next. So, talking about coil maintenance now that we've gone past the Beckett burner. The best way, the one thing about the coil, this is something that honestly nobody does, but it's very important. I notice a lot of people changing their coils more than maintaining them, is every year you want to open up this clamshell, pull your coil out, and pressure clean your coil. A lot of people don't do that. It is recommended by the manufacturer at least once a year to pull your coil out and pressure clean it. It does collect debris. It does get stuff all over it, so you want to make sure you're taking care of that, or else you're going to end up buying a new coil. When the coil is out, a real good thing to do at that time is start running Coil Clean. It's a product called Coil Clean. It's designed, I want to say, to descale your coil. And you want to do that while the coil is out, because you don't want to run Coil Clean through your system. It's very acidic. The pump won't hold up to it. You'll ruin your pump. So when you get your coil out and you're pressure washing it, that's going to be a great time for you to run Coil Clean to your system. And that really has to be done about once a year. We talked about the belts. Coming around, I pretty much touched on everything on this unit. I'm not sure if I missed anything. If you have any questions, you hit us up on janeequipment.com, send us an email, give us a call, we're always available. That's the overview of 8 gallon a minute skid units, whether you have a Stealth pressure washer or a Pressure Pro unit. Everything I went over in this video, that's the components on their unit. That's the maintenance that's required. And if you guys have any questions, leave me a comment below. We have trained professionals here, trained by the factory, and we'll answer all your questions, whatever you need. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.